Good evening, everyone. Thank y'all so much for having me. My name is Ellen Mouton. I am the Program Director and Social Worker with Alzheimer's Services of the Capital Area. We are a nonprofit in Baton Rouge, and we provide education and support resources for people with Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia and their families and care partners as well. So, and we do a lot of community education just to help bring awareness about this disease, but also to help everybody feel prepared for any time you could possibly encounter this. All right, so just some information before I really get into the presentation about my organization, who we are, and what we do. So again, we're Alzheimer's Services of the Capital Area. My office is in Baton Rouge, like in the Mid-City area on North Boulevard, but we cover 10 parishes total, and Point Capee Parish is one of those parishes. So we provide, like I said, education and support resources. So we have a lot of different things for families to help them feel like they have a good understanding of what this disease, what people experience with this disease and what to expect, but also to feel really supported as well. And we also offer Charlie's Place, which you can see in our logo up there. Charlie's Place is our day program for people with dementia. We currently have 3 different locations. We have one in Baton Rouge, one in Gonzales, and then we just opened one in Baker as well. So Charlie's Place offers an opportunity for those with dementia to come and spend usually a couple days a week with us. And it gives them a fun day of stuff to look forward to, but also gives their family a break. And so here you can see our service area, all of the 10 parishes that we serve. So in this room, does anybody in here have a loved one or a friend affected by Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia? Okay, so a couple people. Okay. All right, so let's first start by talking about what is the difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia. So I think this is probably the biggest and most popular question that we get at our office. So the term dementia essentially equals brain failure. It basically means that our brain is not operating in the way that it should. It's not firing on all cylinders. Something essentially is going wrong. And dementia has a lot of different symptoms that fall underneath that. So you can see here at that top. So dementia is an umbrella term that encompasses a lot of different things underneath it. So it's a collection of different brain diseases and their symptoms that can be anything from memory loss to impaired judgment, trouble with decision making, things like that. And then under that dementia umbrella, we get into some of the specific diagnoses. So some of the specific things that cause for dementia to occur. So the first that we see under that umbrella is Alzheimer's disease. So Alzheimer's disease is still the most common form of dementia. This accounts for about 60 to 70% of dementia cases. So 60 to 70% of people with dementia have an Alzheimer's specific diagnosis. Alzheimer's disease specifically is characterized by a growth of plaque and tangles that develop in the brain and essentially cause the brain to shrink over time, which when your brain begins to shrink, it just makes all of our functioning, our day-to-day functioning, more difficult. And common symptoms of Alzheimer's disease are things like impairment in memory is usually that first thing that we see, that forgetfulness, issues with language, and issues with what's called visuospatial skills. This is a term I'll use throughout the presentation tonight. And when I say visuospatial skills, I mean that people with dementia have a hard time telling depth and distance. So they can't always tell how far out something is, how large or wide something is, things like that. Next up is you'll see vascular dementia. So vascular dementia is about 10 to 20% of dementia cases. You see vascular dementia a lot in people who have experienced a lack of blood flow or oxygen to their brain. So very common in people that may have experienced a stroke, for example. This can most common symptoms we see with this would be things like impaired motor skills or trouble with judgment and decision making with this one as well. And you're also going to see that a lot of those common symptoms that are listed under here overlap for different types of dementia as well. Next to vascular dementia, you'll see frontotemporal dementia, or also called FTD. This accounts for about 10% of dementia cases. This type of dementia we've heard about a lot more recently because this is what Bruce Willis has been diagnosed with. Also Wendy Williams too. They both have the same diagnosis. And the average age of onset for FTD can be in anywhere from 55 to 65 years old. So it is a younger diagnosis typically. So this is when we see damage or some type of deterioration in that frontal lobe here and those temporal lobes on the side. And we see a lot of challenges with personality changes and also issues with language as well. And just to go back, because I did mention how FTD can sometimes affect people at a younger age, so can Alzheimer's disease. So Alzheimer's disease, back to that first one we talked about, has two forms of onset. It has an average in life onset, or a late life onset, which is above the age of 65, or it has an early in life onset, which can impact people below the age of 65. We have had clients as young as in their 40s, so it really can affect people at a wide variety of ages. And then next to frontotemporal dementia, up there you'll see that Lewy body dementia. So Lewy body dementia is about 5% of dementia cases. This is when we develop a protein in our brain called the Lewy body protein, and it deposits on our nerve cells. Lewy body dementia causes for a lot of hallucinations, a lot of really intense paranoia, disordered sleep for people. And then in that last box, you can just see some of the other types of dementia. But what I like to think about this, because I think it can still be kind of confusing, understanding dementia, how it's different than all these other diagnoses. And I heard it said recently in a presentation, and I really liked it, where someone described dementia and all the different types of dementia as bread. So if you go to the grocery store and you're shopping on the bread aisle, for example, you have tons of different choices of what type of bread you'd like to buy. There's white bread, wheat bread, sourdough bread, French bread, all kinds of different breads. They're all different. They all taste differently, they age differently, they progress differently. But at the end of the day, they're all breads. And so dementias kind of work the same way, where all of these are dementias, but they're just each individually a little bit different. Okay, so y'all tell me what you think, true or false. Is memory loss a natural form of aging? True or false? True? Okay. So yes, memory loss is a natural form of aging. So, and we'll come back to that in a little bit too and talk more about that. So I wanted to include in this presentation just some updated statistics that have come out this year, some of the 2025 statistics. All of these come from the Alzheimer's Association, which is a national organization that does a lot of Alzheimer's research for the United States in particular. So right now in the United States, there are over 7 million Americans living with an Alzheimer's diagnosis. Currently, about 1 in 3 older adults dies with being diagnosed with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. And we did see between the years of 2000 and 2022, we saw deaths from heart disease decrease by about 2.1%. But in that same exact time frame, that 2000 to 2022, so that 22-year span, we saw a rise in deaths related to Alzheimer's disease by 142%. And so you can really see how crucial it is that we raise our level of awareness and education about this disease because it's impacting a lot of people. Also, there's a lot of statistics in here, and I can always send you guys a copy of these slides too in case you'd really like to read over some of these in depth. But what this talks about a lot is how expensive this disease is. This is a very, very costly disease to families and to people diagnosed with it because it's a progressive disease. Dementia most typically does not get better. It just unfortunately worsens over time. And so when you have a progressive disease that gets worse and worse as time goes on, the cost and the level of help that person needs just becomes greater. And so sometimes families will have to hire help or move their loved one to a care facility or maybe retire from their job early to take care of their loved ones, things like that. And then these are just some statistics just to our state alone. So right now in Louisiana, we have close to 95,000 people living with an Alzheimer's diagnosis. So this is about 12.4% of adults over the age of 65. And then I always like to highlight this too. So at our office, a lot of what we do is work for care partners. So this is the people caring for their loved ones with dementia, whatever that person may be, whether that is a family member, a friend, a neighbor. So in our state alone, we have about 252,000 people that consider themselves a caregiver in some form. And what we have learned a lot in research recently is how taxing caring for a person with dementia can be on a caregiver. And so you can kind of see some of those stats here. So this is all from the 2025 Alzheimer's Association report. So this year, there has been a 67.8% of caregivers that report that they have chronic health conditions. About 32.6% of caregivers report that they deal with depression, and then 16.2% of caregivers report that they're in poor physical health. And so this is why we have to work to advocate for the care partners and caregivers that we can. So let's talk a little bit about warning signs. So it's some things to look for. So while these are the 10 most common warning signs, I would also consider these like the most common also symptoms that most people with dementia also deal with. So that first one, so I actually a little while ago, is memory loss a natural form of aging? And we pretty much agreed, yes, true. So memory loss is that first warning sign that we see with a dementia diagnosis. So, but memory loss can look differently for different people. So when I say memory loss, when it comes to dementia, this is going to be really, really impactful memory loss. It's not just going to be memory loss like I've lost my phone or I can't find my keys again. That happens to all of us. This will be really impactful things like maybe I'm driving to my son's house where he's lived for 25 plus years, but today I can't remember how to get there, and maybe I can't remember how to get back home. Or maybe I'm making a dish for a holiday that I've made for my family for a very, very long time. But today I can't remember the recipe or maybe the steps, and I'm mixing a lot of things up. Or maybe I wake up in the morning and maybe I'm on vacation with my family and I walk into the living room and I don't necessarily recognize everyone or remember all of their names. So we see how those are really different than when we just forget things in our day-to-day. So memory loss is normal, yes, but when it becomes not normal is when it really begins to impact our quality of life. That second warning sign is difficulty performing familiar tasks. So a lot of people with dementia really struggle to do our day-to-day task. So that can be anything like getting dressed, taking a shower, picking out an outfit, brushing our teeth, preparing a meal, anything like that can become increasingly difficult for a person with dementia. Also, too, problems with language. We're going to talk in this presentation, and one thing that David and I talked about is how important communication is when working with a person with dementia. That is by far the biggest challenge that we deal with most of the time. So people with dementia can struggle with a number of language issues. This can be anything like maybe forgetting a word, or maybe mixing up words in the place of another word, or just general confusion about finishing a sentence. And then we see disorientation to time and place. So people with dementia get mixed up sometimes, day from night, time of day. There's also a really common term associated with this called sundowning. Has anybody heard that term before? Okay. So sundowning is a specific type of disorientation that occurs in the afternoon, typically when the sun begins to go down. For a lot of people, it starts even sometimes around like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, really when the day begins to wind down. And this essentially causes for increased disorientation, increased confusion for people with dementia. And a lot of times it's just due to their internal clock just being different than our internal clock. And then that fifth one, poor decreased judgment. So maybe just some difficulty with decision making, knowing right from wrong, things like that. Okay. That next set of warning signs, so number 6, is problems with abstract thinking. So people with dementia can sometimes struggle with really abstract tasks, really big tasks. So an example of this can be like balancing a checkbook or managing a bank account, something like that can be really difficult, or managing bills, things like that. Also, too, misplacing things. If you've ever cared for a loved one with dementia, you know how frustrating it is for them to lose things, because it's inevitable. They will lose things. But a lot of times people with dementia, they don't have the ability, like those of us without dementia, to think, well, where's the last place I saw that? Or to maybe retrace their step and go back to it. Instead, maybe they can't do that, or maybe they've even forgotten the place of origin that that item actually belongs in our house. And then these next two I usually like to talk about together. So changes in mood or behavior and changes in personality. So a lot of times people with dementia, their mood can shift throughout the day along with their behaviors and how they handle themselves with those moods. And sometimes people will even see full changes in personality, and their loved one maybe will respond to things in a different way than maybe they used to. And then that 10th warning sign, just that loss of initiative. So really that drive to be independent, to like get up and go and take charge of your day, can be very, very difficult for a person with dementia. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about communication and some of what happens to our language when a person begins to develop dementia. So like I mentioned earlier, I would think this is one of the things that's the most crucial to talk about here tonight, because if you are responding to a call and your patient is a person with dementia, their language skills are most likely different than our language skills. Also, too, their reality and the world that they exist in is probably different than ours, too. A lot of times we can think about our brain like a really, really long filing cabinet. And as we live our life, we put memories in that filing cabinet, nice, neat, chronological order, as they happen as we live them. When we develop dementia, those skills and all those pretty nice, neat files can be thrown out all over the brain floor and become totally disorganized. And when we have to utilize a skill, like communicating with someone else or answering a question or engaging in conversation, sometimes our brain will really struggle to pick up those different memories that have been spread all over the brain floor. And so sometimes when we're talking with a person with dementia, maybe they think it's a different year. Maybe they think they're a different age. Maybe they don't recognize their loved one for the person that they are, because maybe in their reality, that person is a younger version of them that maybe they don't recognize now today as an older version. So I think that's why it's important to recognize some of those things, to talk about that, just to prepare anybody for things maybe they could potentially, face in the future. So some of the things that dementia causes to happen to our language skills. So overall, it just diminishes our ability to properly communicate verbally. It makes it difficult to express our thoughts and our emotions, makes it difficult to understand other people, and then makes visual, so the way we present ourselves or enter a room, much more important than content. So some things that dementia can look like. So it can look like difficulty retracing our steps, confusion about location, confusion with time and place, frustration, even also that word confusion, and then for some people, delusions and hearing voices as well, like we talked about earlier. And then some common challenges in caregiving that we see. So trouble communicating clearly, maybe an overstimulating environment. People with dementia are very, very sensitive to external stimuli. So noise, lights, sounds, all things that go along with an emergency responding call. And so automatically that environment can be heightened. It can already be really stressful. And so maybe they can become really sensitive to that overstimulating environment. Also too, frustration with task is a part of this as well. Boredom for the person with dementia, they sometimes face. And sometimes it makes care partners uncomfortable that their loved one could be bored. Maybe an agitated caregiver is also a normal part of this. Tiredness, physical discomfort, and an unfamiliar environment too, because maybe their reality is just different. Okay, so if you take anything from my presentation today, this is the best tip, I think, one of the best tips to take. This and the other couple slides that we'll do. So does anybody have their phone that they would be willing to get their stopwatch out and participate with me in this? Got it? Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to show you guys the 16-second rule. So what this is saying is it can take a person with dementia up to 16 seconds to hear a question, like to understand a question we're asking them, process that question, and respond back to us, give us an answer, okay? Which is crucially important for you guys, especially if you're trying to ask a person with dementia, what did you call for, what do you need? So I'm gonna ask you a question. Once I ask you the question, if you could put your timer on, time it for 16 seconds. Once you hit 16 seconds, if you could just answer me. Okay, you ready? All right, I'll ask you the question, then you turn it on, okay? All right, you ready? Okay, did you eat lunch today?
Yes.
Thank you. So how did that amount of time feel?
Forever.
Forever? Felt long, huh? I think it can feel sort of like uncomfortable too, to just be silent like that for so long. So I like to do that exercise because I think it helps to remind us all that that is just a normal part of dementia, that sometimes people with dementia just need more time. We just have to slow down and give them time to process. And I always like to keep this acronym in my mind, WAIT, W-A-I-T, why am I talking? Because maybe if we're getting that from that person with dementia, maybe we just need to slow down and give them some time to process. And I would also consider for a lot of people 16 seconds to be the minimum. Some people may need a lot longer. Okay, so these next two slides also are crucially important, I think, in the communication skills of a person with dementia. So we know that our language abilities are impacted the way that dementia impacts the brain. But we have different language abilities stored on different sides of our brain. And most typically with dementia, we end up losing the skills on our left side of our brain and really retaining the skills on the right side of our brain. And so in that left temporal lobe, where we lose a lot of skills when we have dementia, are our vocabulary, so all of the words and things that we know, our ability for comprehension, so our ability to understand, and our speech production. And so when you think about that, those are things that people with dementia lose, so our vocabulary, our comprehension, and our speech production, you can see how a lot of these challenges can occur. But in that right temporal lobe, a lot of the stuff that was retained are things like forbidden words, so maybe like curse words or really harsh language, maybe racially insensitive words, or maybe really aggressive type words. That usually stays for most people. Also, that ability to go back and forth. So that ability to engage in social chit chat. So a lot of people with dementia, their like care partners will say that when they bring them out in public or they'll go to the doctor will never know, could never tell that something's wrong with them because they're engaging. They're saying, hi, how are you? How's your day? All of that. But when you really try to get into a more complex conversation with them, it becomes really difficult. But people with dementia, they still have that social chit chat. They also have the ability to argue. That also stays on that right side of the brain too. Also things like rhythm of speech. So our ability to understand when something is a question, like when it sounds like a question. our ability to understand tone, which kind of goes into that question thing too, and changes in tone as well. Also things like rhythm learned and comfort. So music, poetry, prayer, counting, all of that stays. And then things like our autonomic motion. So our ability to dance, our ability to rock back and forth for self-soothing, a lot of that stays with us. And then there's also some vision changes that occur for people with dementia as well as they progress through the stages of dementia. So I'm gonna have y'all participate with me in this. You don't have to get up or anything, but it is really helpful to participate. So if everybody could just put your hands out in front of you, like just like this, in like a V. Turn your hands in, yes. And just try to keep them out. Try to put them like high up like mine, exactly like that. So this is about 45 degrees, visual field or so. This is normal aging. This is about 75 years of age, pretty much on average. So I think now put your hands down and think about what you couldn't see just by that field of vision alone, okay? Now, as we progress through dementia, maybe early stage dementia, or as you see on my slide, we refer to as the diamond stage, which this is all from Tiba Snow. She's a dementia educator. So I want you to take your hands again, and I want you to form two C's in front of you. And then I want you to put them up to your face like this, kind of like you're going through a tunnel. And I want you to slowly, because I don't want you to get dizzy, look up, and then you're gonna look straight down, all the way down, like your chin to your chest. And then look to the right, and look to the left. And then I want you to take that tunnel vision back off. Do you notice a big difference in what you can and cannot see? Okay. Now our next step, as we progress further into dementia, so take those C's again, and we're going to turn them into O's. Okay, put those same, like we're wearing binoculars. So I want you to do that same thing. Look up, look all the way down, and I want you to look right, and I want you to look left. And then everybody look straight for me. So I'm going to take my goggles off, but keep yours on for now. So I want you to imagine you're a person with dementia, and your loved one has put down a plate of food in front of you because it's time to eat dinner. And they're telling you, Mom, you need to eat. I put your plate in front of you. But if I'm talking, or if maybe I'm the TV and the TV's on, and you're looking at me, you're engaged, could you see that plate of food in front of you? Okay. Thank you. You can put your goggles down. And then as we progress through other stages of dementia, we see even more changes, where maybe some people will encounter things like more monocular type vision, where maybe we can just see using one eye. But I also like to talk about that this is not a loss of vision. This is just a change in vision. And it's just a change in our brain's ability to use all of the skills that we have. So as we progress through dementia, our brain is being impacted as we go through. And so some of those skills just become more difficult. So our brain sort of has to prioritize what becomes most important. So you can see, though, think about it in the context of you're entering someone's home with dementia, and maybe they're at that binocular vision stage, and they're just engaged with someone in front of them, and how scary it could be for someone to maybe touch them on the back, or to even come up from the side, and maybe they don't even realize that you're there. So we just have to kind of really pace ourselves and go really slow. So I also put in here some tips for body language and communication. So when we're approaching a person with dementia, we want to try to be face-to-face with them, eye level. So if they're in a wheelchair or they're sitting down, we want to try to get on their level. We also want to focus on clear, direct, simple language. We want to make sure we're using that auditory first. Now we know maybe their vision is impacted. So we want to try to get their attention, auditory first, calling out their name or just in some form. And then we want to make sure they can see us before we ever, approach them. Also, too, we want to make sure we check our space. We want to make sure that they're comfortable. And sometimes when we get too close or we're sitting too close, it could make them feel intimidated or uncomfortable. Also watching our initial approach, how we approach a person with dementia. So like we've learned now, they can pick up on tone and changes like that. And so always remembering it's not how we're saying it's not what we're saying, it's how we're saying it, excuse me. And so making sure to just be mindful of that at all times. Monitoring any sudden movements, any tone changes or tense facial expressions. Also trying to be mindful of their body language as well and maybe changes you see. Standing to their side instead of directly in front of them. So just approaching them more like this instead of straight on. As we know now, it can be kind of intimidating to shake up that whole visual field. We want to initiate a greeting when entering a room or needing their attention. Again, that 16 seconds, waiting for their response before we continue, and trying to use positive statements. Or we can always use things like this, that, or something else. So if we're needing a person with dementia to make a decision, but maybe they're feeling overwhelmed or maybe there's too many things available to them, we can say, do you want to wear your red shirt or your blue shirt or something else? Or is it your stomach or your head or something else that hurts? Just trying to help them narrow it down. So in case maybe their language is impacted, we can help them to get there. And then some do's of communication. So we want to make sure we work with their schedule. So, and this is hard for you guys, obviously, but if you are caring for a person with dementia, maybe some people respond better in the morning or in the evening, things like that. So just being mindful of that. Again, checking on your tone, keeping the company and the conversation small. So as we've talked about, people with dementia become overwhelmed very easily. So if we're ever talking with a person with dementia, and maybe they have a loved one there too that's with you, and maybe there's other people in the room or other noise, we want to try to eliminate as much of that as we can and just try to focus on just them. We also too want to allow for them to have breaks, remove, again, any background noise, use and observe any verbal cues or gestures. If maybe that person with dementia can't tell you what they need, you can say, can you show me what you need? And maybe they can act out something or a gesture, something that maybe they are in need of. Also to include a connection to people that you reference. So if you're needing to tell them that their daughter told them something, doing what you can to use their name or even just like who they are, their title in some way. And then you may need to reintroduce yourself, maybe after a little while, especially if they're feeling really overwhelmed. Also too, working to help them to feel heard. Try to respond in some way, even if maybe their language is lacking and maybe they're not using verbal language as much anymore. Knowing that when comfortable, touch can be a form of communication, and hoping for moments of clarity with them, and then encouraging others towards more positive, inclusive communication. And then just some don'ts, so things we want to try to avoid for people with dementia. So things like challenging questions, asking them, do you remember when this happened? That can be really difficult for a person with dementia. Also, we want to try to avoid arguing with them. If we know they're saying something that's wrong, we want to try to work at that, just let it go when we can. We want to avoid pointing out any mistakes, assuming that they're not going to remember things, and then we want to avoid talking over them, talking about them, and talking down to them. Okay. So I do want to talk a little bit about research and what we know now about brain health and risk factors and how and why people are developing dementia. So we now know that Alzheimer's disease can be hereditary. We had suspected that for a long time, but now there is data to support that, especially when we have a loved one, like a direct relative. So like a parent or a sibling, it automatically raises our chance of developing dementia. Doesn't mean we'll get dementia, but it does make our chance a little bit greater. Also, we know that effects of dementia are individualized. We always say, if you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. You will never meet two people with dementia who are identical or have the same journey or the same symptoms. Everybody's different. We do know, though, that we can get help sooner rather than later. So a lot of the research that's come out now is to help us with our brain health, and so that hopefully those of us that have not been diagnosed with cognitive impairment can make changes in our lives so that we can either help to really delay a diagnosis or maybe avoid a really impactful diagnosis or something like that. So these are 14 dementia risk factors. So this is a list of some risk factors that research has showed that cause for people to have an elevated risk of developing dementia. And what's interesting about these is a lot of these are things we can change or we can impact. So one, physical inactivity. So just engaging in physical activity when we can. What's recommended for majority of people is about 150 minutes a week. So that's about 30 minutes, 5 days a week or so. But everybody's a little bit different. So it's always good to check with your doctor. But physical activity automatically reduces your risk of developing dementia. Also, avoiding smoking reduces your risk. Avoiding excessive alcohol consumption. Air pollution, that's one of those things we don't really have control over. Head injury. Infrequent social contact. So this is something we know a lot more about now, that people who don't have a lot of social contact, maybe experience a lot more isolation, automatically raises their risk of developing dementia. We saw a lot of that during COVID for a lot of people. People with less education, unfortunately, have a higher risk of developing dementia. There's only so much we can control with that as well. Obesity is a risk factor too. Hypertension, so unmanaged hypertension. So if you have hypertension and you do manage it with your physician and medication, that lowers your risk of developing dementia. Also diabetes, same for that, making sure that it's managed. Depression, hearing impairment, also can be managed with a hearing aid. High LDL cholesterol and vision loss, 2 more that can be managed. And then this here I just included for you guys too. This is what's called the Lancet report. This came out last year from the UK. And it's just a graphic essentially showing all of the things we just talked about. But what's interesting about the Lancet report is it breaks it down by age. So it looks at early in life, what are the highest risk factors? So you see early in life is that less education. We see in our middle of life, a lot of that stuff comes into play. And then later in life, so that blue bubble at the bottom, so those are things like social isolation, air pollution, and visual loss are higher impacted later in life. Okay. And then this is just some information about my organization and some of the programs that we offer. So like I said earlier, we do a lot of education and support. Majority of my day is spent on the phone with families who are taking care of their loved ones with dementia, just talking about practical tips, not knowing the next step of what to do, and just really needing someone to talk to about it. So I always advise people, just give us a call with any question. So you all should have a copy of my card. If you ever need more, let me know. But you can give these to any family that maybe you encounter if you're responding to calls for people with dementia, or maybe just someone maybe you suspect could have dementia or something like that. We also do a lot of other things too. Like I mentioned, we have Charlie's Place. We have education to help families understand the financial expenses of this disease as well. We have a reimbursement program that helps to reimburse families for sitters, so like out-of-pocket expenses towards caregivers. And we have a lot of fun programs for people with dementia too. But again, that phone service that we offer, and we have a massive, massive resource library of information and education for people with dementia. This is information on our helpline. It's open Monday through Friday, 8 to 4. And then this is my contact information. So if you guys ever have any questions or anything you'd ever like any input on, feel free to call me anytime.